Welcome, beautiful beings, to Integrating Consciousness. My name is Lelanea, and I currently express as a Transcendental coach and Unity Consciousness guide. My work is devoted to guiding others in their inner work and supporting the collective in the expansion of consciousness and all the new perspectives and experiences that brings. Today's conversation is a continuation of a greater exploration I call internal systems. These are the foundations of wholeness that support us in our return to authenticity and includes a person's unique and innate values, standards, boundaries, morals, and integrity. This series is broken into parts so you can digest and integrate at your own pace. And if you haven't yet watched part one on values, I encourage you to do so. That conversation will support today's focus on standards. I'll also be referencing my workbook, Becoming Whole Through Internal Systems, which is available in my school community. And there you'll also find bi-weekly group coaching to help you move through the practices. And if you are ready for deeper personalized work, you can book a discovery call with me. Together, we can design a blueprint to support your search and refinement of the authentic self, where we anchor into self-love, self-worth, and purpose, all while developing healthy relationships with the ego. I want to ask you, please don't let the focus on these sets of nouns confuse you. Internal systems work is very much about spiritual work, as these nouns are reflections of the inner work. Without a deep understanding of our relationships to these sets of words, we move through life untethered, empty, and lacking an honest and authentic relationship with self and others. This is the spiritual work. Before we begin, I would like to invite you to settle into presence with me and be here now. Presence is the first step to choosing the self, and choosing the self is an act of love. For most of us, that means silencing our phones, closing a door, and taking a couple of deep breaths to anchor into the now. I would also like to recommend that you keep a notebook nearby. If emotions, realizations, pivots, breakthroughs, or questions arise, pause this video and write them down. Giving your inner process space on the page helps you move energy through and out of the body. This is a beautiful somatic process and a very entry-level somatic process. So let's begin the conversation. So when we lack standards, many of us have found ourselves in patterns of relationship or partnership where we begin to tolerate the intolerable. We find ourselves accepting disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional manipulation. We remain in toxic or one-sided relationships out of the fear of being alone. We feel depleted because we lack standards around rest, emotional labor, mental labor, or lopsided energy exchange. We overgive to people, projects, environments that do not honor our worth. And we seek validation to fill the void of an undefined self, which leaves us feeling invisible, misunderstood, or resentful, but not always knowing why. Sometimes this even leads us to violate our own values. We show up inconsistently in our behavior, acting from impulse, pressure, or the need for approval rather than principle. And without realizing it, we become the toxic ones, unable to regulate our emotions, lashing out under stress, betraying our own truth to fit in or to please others. It is a slippery slope. So this can look like staying in jobs, partnerships, or communities that are deeply misaligned. It can look like accepting crumbs of intimacy, attention, or respect and calling it enough. It can look like convincing ourselves that we are unworthy of more. So a person without clear standards moves through life without an internal framework to guide choices, relationships, and self-respect. And the line between self-honoring and self-abandonment becomes dangerously blurred. So what standards truly are? Standards are not rules or social expectations. They are energetic thresholds that govern the vibrational integrity of the self. They function as quantum boundaries shaping which realities we collapse into form and which we leave unmanifest. Standards define how we relate to ourselves, what we allow into our field, and what we project out into the quantum field as potentiality. In essence, standards are vibrational declarations. So, a statement of what aligns with your frequency and what does not. Let's take a look at 5 different perspectives of standards. Number 1, standards as quantum thresholds. So, at the quantum level, consciousness is fluid, interacting with infinite probabilities. Standards act as a vibrational threshold. They determine which of those probabilities collapse into your lived experience. So without standards, your consciousness becomes porous, easily influenced by external energies, societal scripts, or lower frequency timelines. If you're an empath, you're at even more of a greater risk. So with standards, you stabilize your field. You focus your attention on possibilities that resonate with your authentic frequency. Standards define the minimum frequency of experience you're willing to accept. They are the energetic gatekeepers of your reality. So, for those with a notebook nearby, here's a curiosity prompt. Where in your life are you experiencing resentment? So, resentment often reveals where we are failing to uphold boundaries or standards. It's the canary in the coal mine. And for me personally, when I collapse my standards, it feels dirty. It is a deep self abandonment, as though I'm allowing something malevolent or degrading to unfold while I stand on the sidelines watching myself betray myself. I can trace this feeling back to adolescence, moments when I knew I was my own protector, but second guessed my perception of reality, disassociating, looking away, avoiding ownership, because I perceived it as confrontation. Each time I collapsed into comfort instead of integrity. Number 2, standards and the observer effect. We covered quite a bit of this in the values. So, quantum physics teaches that the observer collapses potential into form. In quantum psychology, your standards determine how you observe yourself and your environment, which translates into your lens of perception, aka reality. So, low standards filter your observation through unworthiness or fear. You collapse timelines or attract experiences of disempowerment and misalignment. Your reality is continuously going to reflect this back to you. High standards raise your vibrational point of observation. From this higher lens, you collapse coherent, aligned experiences into reality. Your standards shift the very perspective through which you observe life, and that perspective alters the frequency of what you manifest. So here's another curiosity prompt. Where does resentment arise in your life? And would raising your standards in that area shift that feeling? So, number 3, standards and entanglement boundaries. In quantum entanglement, particles influence each other across great distances. On an experiential and a metaphysical level, emotional and psychological entanglement happens when we lack strong internal standards. Without them, we tolerate relationships that deplete us, say yes when our truth says no. We enmesh with people, systems, and identities that fracture our sovereignty. So this is where attachment becomes our prison. Standards prevent unconscious entanglement. They filter what belongs to us from what does not. They protect our sovereignty by guarding the integrity of our consciousness. So number 4, standards as stabilizers of the energy field. What does this mean? So in quantum systems, coherence is necessary for stability, and standards are what create coherence in our energy field. They regulate how energy flows through our relationships, choices, and embodiment. So without standards, your energy becomes erratic and destabilized by emotional or environmental shifts. With them, you create energetic architecture that grounds and stabilizes you. It's a northern compass or northern star. And from a nervous system perspective, standards reduce hypervigilance or overgiving, overperformance, and burnout, all common symptoms of boundaryless living. Number 5, standards in depth psychology. So, in depth psychology, standards are essential for individuation, the process of becoming whole. Carl Jung, who coined the term individuation, saw it as embracing a spiritual experience, and he even linked it to practices like Taoism, Zen Buddhism, and esoteric Christianity. This process can deepen one's spirituality and lead to a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So, standards allow for ego differentiation, self definition, and psychic containment. And without standards, the ego dissolves into chaos, adapting compulsively to please others, wearing masks, or splintering into personas. And just a reminder, standards are not rigid rules. They are flexible contracts with the self. They protect the inner child, the inner feminine, and the masculine, and the emerging archetypes of the psyche. They safeguard the self, the capital S self, from fragmentation and build a stable identity rooted in wholeness. So, examples of lacking standards. Let's look at some real world examples of what happens when we don't hold standards. Number 1, romantic relationships. You may find yourself repeatedly attracting emotionally unavailable partners. You rationalize their behavior with thoughts like, at least they're not abusive, or no one's perfect, or they're just really busy, or they have a lot on their plate. You avoid setting boundaries because you fear losing the relationship or being seen as too much, too needy, too difficult. So, one of my very first clients embodied this struggle. She was a middle aged woman who lived in constant dysregulation, disorientation, and chaos. She's constantly chipping away at herself as though she was trying to find parts of herself that she could emotionally mutilate for the sake of keeping a lover who treated her so incredibly insignificant, as if she were disposable. She continuously protected him, despite him damn near pushing her out of his house, barely dressed, after intimacy was fulfilled. He would only call her, message her, or talk to her when he wanted intimacy. And then would become enraged if she asked for a follow-up date, dinner, or even a walk in the park. And still, she found endless ways to justify his cruelty, from his childhood, his past traumatic relationships, to him having a busy schedule, and his dedication to his spiritual path. But compassion for someone's pain does not mean that we make ourselves a doormat. It does not mean that we become sacrificial lambs to prove what love looks like. True love is shown not by martyrdom, but how we love ourselves firstly. So here's another curiosity prompt. What standards have you collapsed in order to keep a relationship? And are you doing it now? 2, friendships, one-sided friendships. So maybe you're the friend who listens for hours, yet your own struggles are never asked about. You leave the conversation drained, but return out of obligation, afraid that asserting your needs will drive them away. Or maybe you are the opposite, the one who offloads without first asking if your friend has the space to receive it. Do you check in before venting, or do you treat your friend as free therapy? Are you the friend who disappears immediately once you start a new relationship? All of a sudden, you stop engaging, interacting, or investing in your friendships when you enter into a new relationship with a partner. Standards in friendship are not about perfection. They're about reciprocity and awareness. Number 3, the office doormat. So at work, you might allow your boss to pile more tasks onto your plate than others receive. You don't advocate for a raise. You don't set limits on your time. And why? Because you fear being seen as ungrateful or worse, replaceable. And in that fear, the mind creates stories. These stories sound like no one else is hiring. I'm too old to change. I'm too old to even get hired. This is the best I'll get. At least the office is close to home. But these are not facts. They are limiting beliefs born from fear. And paradoxically, the very risk you fear, such as leaving the job or setting the boundary, is often the doorway to the life you're truly meant for. This is called the fear paradox, when leaning into what we fear most is actually how we obtain freedom, and by avoiding what we fear. We're actually encouraging and instigating it or collapsing timelines that resonate with the fear. The universe doesn't recognize the subject we fear, scarcity, loss, lack, poverty. But what it does recognize is the vibration of the feelings, thoughts, mindsets, and behaviors in accordance with the avoidance of these things. So, where the attention goes, energy flows, and you attract because the universe matches. So, to share one of my personal stories that's so relevant, before stepping into my professional path as a transcendental coach, I worked on and off for years in an incredibly niche industry as a wine sommelier. This field, unregulated, highly competitive, and deeply hierarchical, operates without unions or oversight. So you are literally at the mercy of some of the most inflated egos performing for millionaires and billionaires who often exhibit extreme entitlement, narcissistic behavior, and a general absence of accountability. So for years, I went without setting boundaries. I was sexually assaulted. I was placed in compromising and dangerous situations by my superiors. I was lied to and duped out of agreed financial terms more than once. I was expected to lie, participate in unethical business practices, and my sense of safety and dignity was repeatedly violated. I had learned that the very industry that provided me with my income and my way of life was also the greatest threat to my safety. And when I finally started setting boundaries, you bet your ass I got fired. I got fired more than once. But that moment, as terrifying as it was, became one of the greatest turning points of my life. And in that industry, I had internalized and participated in numerous survival strategies, from becoming invisible, fading into the background, keeping my head down, to overperforming just to earn protection by aligning with male dominated power structures so that I could be seen as one of the guys. So none of this was authentic. All of this was fucking exhausting. And I was in a constant state of burnout. So eventually I chose myself. Losing jobs turned out to be a gift and in alignment with my new frequency. It forced a radical redirection, a 180-degree spin. I realigned with my values. I stepped into a path of purpose. I began expanding my comfort zone, and I became a version of myself that challenges my ego daily. So I no longer choose the ego's easy or comfortable way out. And because of that, life has become far more alive, expansive, textured, and celebrated. So today I feel more connected to my higher self than I ever have. And no, it's not because I left the wine industry. It's because I've learned to challenge my own belief systems. I confront the voice in my head that says, stay small, stay safe. But freedom doesn't come from a job title or an income bracket. It comes from deprogramming the lies we inherited about who we have to be. It comes from letting go of the outdated self we once believed we needed to be in order to survive. And it comes from proving to ourselves that who we were was just a version of us chosen in one moment. And who we are becoming, that too is a choice, a conscious, empowered, liberating choice that is determined from the now, from the present in this very moment. Number 4, communication dynamics. Standards also show us how we communicate. So if you allow others to talk over you, dismiss your ideas, or consistently interrupt you, you may internalize that as a reflection of your worth. How we communicate and what we tolerate in communication speaks volumes. It signals to others how secure we are in ourselves It shows whether we're still acting from old programming or whether we're embodying our truth. Now, let's take a look at the consequences of living without standards. When we abandon standards, the cost is steep, and it looks like erosion of self esteem over time. It looks like codependency and emotional enmeshment. It looks like chronic resentment and anger leading to physical inflammation and even disease. It looks like a fragmented identity, easily manipulated and lost. And it looks like repeating the same painful cycles in relationships over and over and over. And it also looks like a constant lack of safety within ourselves and our world. So, standards are not about rigidity or control. They're about coherence, about creating inner clarity that translates into outer alignment. So, what are standards? Standards define the minimum respect you require from yourself and others will follow your lead. So, how we treat ourselves is a signal to those around us and who we attract. Standards support healthy relationships and needs. Standards anchor your sense of worth in love rather than performance. Standards protect your values and authentic expression. Standards teach others what to expect of you and by what you first give to yourself. Standards teach others what to expect of you by what you first give to yourself. So, in depth psychology, standards protect us from fragmentation. They keep the ego from collapsing into these lower emotions of shame or inflating at the opposite end of the spectrum into arrogance. Instead, they create a bridge to wholeness. So, I ask you, where in your life have you allowed unconscious values or the absence of standards to pull you out of resonance with who you truly are? And what would change quantumly, emotionally, spiritually, if you chose to honor your truth as a sacred act of self remembrance? Because unless we're fully present, we will abandon ourselves. It happens to all of us. Sometimes we catch ourselves in the moment and sometimes in reflection. But the work is to notice and to choose differently. So let's recap this and bring this in. Now that we've explored values in the first episode, and today we've gone deep into standards, we can start to see how these two pieces fit together. Values and standards are not just moral ideas, they are frequencies of consciousness. They shape how we attract, interpret, and interact with the world and those around us. So think of it this way. Values are the soul's agreements. They are the blueprints we choose for how to embody our divinity in the human form. Standards are the thresholds of self-honoring. They regulate what we will allow to enter or exit our energetic field. So when we live in alignment with these, our inner and outer realities become coherent. Our field strengthens. We are less vulnerable to fragmentation, energy leaks, or manipulation. But when we betray our values and our standards, we experience soul loss, dissonance, energetic collapse. And this can look like anxiety, resentment, shame, spiritual fatigue, a lack of self-love, not knowing who we are, always in a state of chaos, always having a dysregulated nervous system, constant state of fight or flight. The list goes on. Our values act as filters of perception. They define vibrational signature that we emit and therefore the realities that we collapse into form. For example, if truth is one of my values and I live in truth with myself and others, then I collapse timelines where transparency and clarity unfold. But if I abandon that value in order to please, I collapse timelines of distortion and misalignment. So standards then regulate those realities. They're like quantum containers, preventing energetic interference and maintaining resonance with our highest potential. They tell the field, this is who I am, this is what I want, and therefore attract. So in essence, standards protect us from decoherence. This is the difference between merging with chaos and harmonizing with intentionality. So Many of my clients are so confused about the difference between expectations and standards. And when we first start creating standards, they tend to start and move forward with expectations. And that's completely understandable, which is why we're going to delve a little bit deeper into expectations. So let's move into the distinctions of expectations. For the first time in adulthood, many of us are only just learning how to set boundaries and standards. But for the majority, this begins not from empowerment, but from self protection. We're still operating through the lens of a wounded identity. We see ourselves as victims, victims of unhealthy or toxic familial dynamics, victims of childhood bullying, assault, exploitations, or even neglect, victims of poverty, racism, bigotry, or violence. And yes, we were victims. Our most vulnerable states, we were victims. But if we continue to identify with that role, if we anchor our sense of self there, we risk staying trapped in victim consciousness. This victim mindset can be learned, inherited, and reinforced across generations. Trauma echoes epigenetically through our DNA, through the nervous system, and through stories told and untold. And yet, more than ever, we're witnessing the rise of pattern interrupters, the black sheep, the ones who say, "This ends with me." So I've seen it in my own lineage, and I've seen it in every client I work with. Every single client I work with is a pattern interrupt. We're not here to uphold the pain of the past. We're here to alchemize it. When we create boundaries and standards from this mental state, then we're not leaning into our authenticity. We're anchoring into our fears, creating walls rather than fences, and white knuckling standards into expectations. Expectation is a preconceived belief, assumption, or a projection that a specific event, behavior, or outcome should occur. It is often rooted in past experiences, social conditioning, or internalized beliefs, and it typically carries an emotional charge, meaning that when an expectation is unmet, it tends to evoke disappointment, frustration, anger, shame, and even the perception of abandonment. So, expectations may be explicit or implicit, conscious or unconscious, realistic or idealized. They often masquerade as standards, boundaries, or desires, but unlike these, expectations are externally focused and future bound. So let's take a look at three different angles on expectations. Number one being quantum psychology. So thinkers like Robert Anton Wilson and my favorite, Amit Goswami, remind us expectations collapse possibilities into narrow outcomes. They disrupt the quantum flow by clinging to certainty. So instead of presence, expectations try to engineer control. Expectations say, I know better than the universe, and I'm attempting to reorganize through forced against rather than trusting and leaning into and surrendering into through the only control we actually have, which is not of another, but is of the self, our beliefs, mindsets, thoughts, words, and actions. That is the only thing we have control over. However, expectations is the desire to control another. Expectations are wave function collapsers, meaning they collapse a wide field of possibility, of quantum potential into this narrow projection of what should be rather than what could be. So when we hold expectations, we are no longer in presence with the field. Instead, we're attempting to engineer certainty from uncertainty, coming from a perspective that is less expansive than the potentiality of the field. Expectations bind the self to a fixed identity and timeline, whereas consciousness is inherently fluid and probabilistic and nonlinear. So, an expectation is a limitation in the holographic mind field, where the observer unconsciously tries to bend reality to match their inner narrative, rather than expand to include multiple potential outcomes. In short, expectations disrupt quantum flow and lock the self into dualistic patterns of success, failure, right, wrong, good, bad. This is where we have extremes and polarity. This is where we have black and white thinking. Number two is depth psychology. So in Jungian thought, expectations often arise from internalized voices, which are parental scripts, cultural conditioning, old wounds, which all have the stuff that the mind chatter is made from. So they are shadows in disguise, unspoken demands for love or recognition that we never learn to ask for directly. Expectations often arise from introjected parental voices or family of origin systems, internalized standards of worth and belonging. These patterns become embedded within the ego structure as protective mechanisms. And when they go unmet, they often trigger deep feelings of abandonment and guilt or unworthiness. And at their core, these are the controlling mechanisms of early childhood brainwashing. So, an internalized voice of fear based control that wields shame, guilt, and conditional worth as tools to manipulate behavior. So, even in adulthood, when we perceive ourselves to be free, this inner voice can continue to dominate, masquerading as our own thoughts. This is the very foundation of the inner work to deprogram ourselves from these internal prisons and reclaim the sovereignty of our own true self. Many expectations are actually expressions of shadow needs, aspects of the psyche that were not safely expressed in childhood and now operate indirectly. So, an expectation in depth psychology is a disguised demand, a way of trying to earn love, safety, or recognition without consciously asking for it. Number three is transpersonal psychology. And here, expectations are seen as egoic attachments to outcomes. They disconnect us from soul, from flow, from surrender. And when we release expectations, synchronicity emerges. Life unfolds with us and not against us. They emerge from disconnection from the true self or soul essence and are often attempts to control external circumstances to avoid the inner comfort. So expectations are seen as obstructions to presence, surrender, and self-actualization. When we release expectations, we allow for synchronicity, for spiritual emergence, and a deeper trust in the unfolding of life. The transpersonal journey begins where expectations end, and when we surrender the shoulds of the ego and open to the isness of being, right? So let's take a look at what standards versus expectations look like. And here's a key. So expectations are outward projections. You must do this so that I feel okay. Standards are inward commitments. I choose this because it is true for me. We're often taught, whether consciously or unconsciously, to place expectations on others and how people should behave, how life should unfold, and how situations should go. Expectations are future oriented and external. They are built on assumptions, often shaped by our conditioning, wounding, or childhood experiences. They're rooted in the need to control or predict what others will do in order to feel safe. If I can predict what you're going to do, then I have certainty, right? And because they are projected outward, they're deeply unstable. When our expectations aren't met, and let's be honest, very rarely have my personal expectations on another ever been met, we spiral into disappointment, resentment, and disconnection. And energetically, expectations constrict the flow of life. They keep us attached to outcomes. They feed the ego's need for control and certainty. And spiritually, they anchor us into fear. Psychologically, they're often a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the vulnerability of uncertainty, rejection, or emotional pain. So standards, on the other hand, are entirely different vibration. Standards are internal, they are conscious, intentional, and they're defined by you. Standards reflect how you choose to show up in the world, how you allow yourself to be treated, what you're willing to accept, and what you are not. So while expectations attempt to control others, standards set the tone for your own self respect. They're born from clarity and rooted in your values. Again, standards work relies on our ability to know our values. Standards don't rely on outcomes, they rely on alignment. They aren't about others doing the right thing, they're about you doing the aligned thing, even when it's hard. So, metaphysically and energetically, standards bring coherence. They build a bridge between your internal truth and your external behavior. They create integrity. And from a quantum psychological perspective, standards help you shift from a state of entanglement, where your emotional well being is tied to external reactions, into a state of personal sovereignty. They regulate your nervous system by restoring internal safety and agency. They say, no matter what happens outside of me, I choose to remain aligned with who I am. So if you're struggling with unmet expectations, chronic disappointment, or relational chaos, it may be time to ask yourself, am I trying to control others through my expectations? Or am I anchoring into my personal power through my standards? Because expectations say, you must do this so that I feel okay. But standards say, I choose to do this because it's true for me. One is born out of fear, one is born out of sovereignty. So when we live from a place of projected expectations, we often embody the phrase, do as I say, not as I do. Our words lose weight, our actions lack alignment, and we become individuals who don't say what we mean or mean what we say. There is a dissonance between intention and behavior, and people can read it. Standards, by contrast, create coherence. They anchor us into self awareness and integrity, allowing us to lead from a secure place of knowing who we are rather than from hypocrisy. So, I'd love to explore what the language of expectations versus standards sounds like. Expectation language often sounds like, you should have known I needed support. If you loved me, you'd call every day. I expect you to handle that without me explaining. And I shouldn't have to tell you how I feel. You should just know. These expectations, these expressions lack clarity about one's own needs and instead expects others to just intuit, meet, or comply with internalized ideas. They are often born from early developmental patterns where worth and love were conditional. So, from a psychological perspective, they indicate externalized locus of control. And that's where one's emotions and validation are dependent on others' behaviors. And I'd like to better articulate this. So, externalized locus of control refers to a psychological orientation in which a person believes that their life, outcomes, emotions, or sense of self are primarily shaped by forces outside of themselves, such as other people, circumstances, fate, or even the universe. So rather than being their own actions, choices, or internal authority. Standards language, on the other hand, is declarative, present, and self responsible. So it sounds like, I don't tolerate manipulation. I require reciprocity and safety in relationships. If someone avoids accountability, I remove myself with love. If something compromises my integrity, I step away gracefully but firmly. Standards based language is clear, it's self responsible, and rooted in inner alignment. It expresses what you will or will not do, what you allow, and how you choose to show up independent of others' behavior. So, unlike expectations, which are externally focused and conditional, standards are self defined and internally governed and require you to uphold them, to uphold your own standards and not outsource it on someone else. So, This kind of language communicates boundaries, values, and integrity without blame, coercion, or attachment. So, why does this matter? Expectations, unrealistic or realistic, are absolutely crushing the lives of our youth. Teen depression and suicide are at unprecedented levels. So by the age of 17, 1 in 5 teens has experienced depression. A third of adolescent suicide stems from the unbearable weight of expectations that they never agreed to. And in Japan, there is an increased male-oriented suicide rate of men known as karoshi, and or the social expectations of stoicism, or the culture of not complaining, right? So here there is an expectation that one does not need an emotional outlet, nor is it acceptable to express emotional difficulty. This is why emotional education is vital. It's why conversations like this matter, because learning to distinguish between expectations and standards is not just a spiritual practice, it's a survival skill. So let's bring this home and wrap it up, put it in a pretty little bow. We are living in a profound era of self-ignorance, an age where we are conditioned to self-abandon, silence our needs, and appease others at the cost of our truth. So from an early age, we're taught to deny our inner curiosity, our unique values, and our sense of self in order to uphold expectations of enmeshed family systems and societal ideas. We're encouraged to surrender our personal morals, our beliefs, and our ethics for the sake of collective allegiance or patriotism, loyalty, or tradition, without realizing that a nation is not its politicians or corporations, but its people, our neighbors, our fellow beings. This denial of self happens across all layers: family, culture, media, politics, Hollywood, and pop culture. We are taught implicitly and explicitly to be anyone but who we truly are. It is any wonder that we're witnessing unprecedented levels of teenage depression and suicide. We are raising generations in environments that ask them to perform, conform, and suppress rather than to explore, express, and become. And there is another way. So when we deprogram these inherited narratives, when we rewrite our internal operating systems with a code that honors the human being, the sacred vehicle that we chose at incarnation, then we begin to truly live. We break free from the self-imposed prisons of victimhood, ignorance, and fear. You are more powerful than you've been led to believe, more sovereign, more brilliant, more capable than the world has ever reflected back to you. But that power can only be reclaimed by going inward, by examining your programming and tracing the voices that echo in your mind. Whose beliefs are those? Are they truly yours? What values have you inherited and which are actually guiding your life? And where are you living out of alignment? How is the absence of clear standards and authentic values affecting your relationships, your choices, your sense of peace? What expectations are you projecting onto others and why? Are you trying to control the outcome of things that you were never meant to control? And most importantly, do you absolutely know that what you believe must happen is true? So these questions are not meant to shame, but to liberate, because once you start asking them honestly, you begin to crack the foundation of your own prison. And with each beautiful shard of light that fills the cracks, you remember who you are. And that remembering changes everything. The only way that your life externally changes is when you internally change. And it is hard, it is painful, and you don't have to do it alone because you are not alone. Aloneness is a self-imposed illusion, by the way. So if you want to learn your values and your internal systems, your standards, boundaries, integrity, and morals, I invite you into 2 pathways that I have constructed. So the first pathway is one-on-one coaching. You can schedule a discovery call with me, and together we will design a roadmap using the Becoming Whole Through Internal Systems workbook. We will co-create your blueprint for authenticity, purpose, and healing. And number two is community support. So if one-on-one is not right for you now at this point in your life or ever, you can join my school community. There you will find the Becoming Whole workbook along with bi-weekly group coaching to guide you through it. This is an affordable, accessible way to begin your journey of self-discovery, purpose, and transformation. And if today's conversation resonated, of course, please leave a comment below, share your reflections, your pivots, any aha moments that you've had, and understanding how these conversations support you empowers me in how I show up for this community and for the collective. So through you, I'm learning more about myself and the person that I'm becoming. And if you know someone who could benefit from this conversation around internal systems, please share. Sometimes the smallest gestures become huge energetic catalysts of expansion for another. So I want to say thank you, and may you recognize the powerful creator you are. I'll see you in the school community or in one-on-one coaching.